Shortly before the state legislature adjourned last spring, the House and State Senate agreed and passed legislation designed in part to give a boost to providing better broadband internet service to those parts of the state considered underserved. Today, that's usually defined as areas that have less than 25 megabytes per second of download speed and 3 megabytes per second of upload speed. The Broadband bill, as it became known, allows municipalities to enter into public-private partnerships with private internet service providers, allocates $700,000 to help municipalities plan broadband build-out, and raises $1.5 million annually to subsidize internet service providers to expand infrastructure in rural areas, according to VT Digger. The statute was an effort to respond to calls for upgrading the overall quality of internet service across the state, which is fairly uneven. That was the main agenda item for a conference held at the Mount Snow Ski Resort last November, where business leaders and state officials discussed ways of upgrading internet speeds and making service available in the more rural parts of the state. Counties with large towns, such as Chittenden County, are in pretty good shape, state statistics show. Almost 94% of the county's residents get at least a 25 megabyte download, 3 megabyte upload level of service. But it's a different story in Essex County, up in the Northeast Kingdom, where less than 21% of the residents get the 25 and 3 level of service. Caledonia, Lamoille, and Orleans counties are also among the counties where barely half their populations get modern-day broadband speeds. Bennington County is not the best, but it's not the worst either. About 80% of the county theoretically gets the 25 and 3 speed, but that still leaves a substantial number of residents underserved, more than 1,000 of them, according to the state. Representative Laura Sibilia, whose district includes the towns of Dover, Reedsboro, Stamford, and Wardsboro, has been one of the legislators in the forefront of efforts to improve broadband service in Vermont, and we caught up with her recently in Jamaica for a conversation about what the new statute will do.
So this bill is really intended to empower our local communities to solve the rural broadband problem and to ensure that we have a means of getting to the last mile in terms of connectivity. So we certainly have been struggling with that. Folks are frustrated by that. And it's been my sense that there's an expectation, irritation, frustration with a lot of the national providers that they are not making it to the last mile. And the fact of the matter is there's two things here. The last mile just is not profitable for the national providers. And the regulations are set up such that the state and local areas are preempted from we're federally preempted. So we cannot make these large national for-profit providers cover the last mile. That's been a reality for quite some time. What's been newly emerging is starting to understand what's happening with our copper landline system, particularly in some of our more isolated parts of Vermont. That's really the only communications that these communities have. And that copper landline network, in places where there's competition for telecommunications, when you have cell service or you're able to get voice over internet with a cable or some other fiber connection, folks are dropping their landline. I bet you many viewers here have dropped their landline, and that's fine. What's happening, though, is there are some folks that cannot drop that copper landline connection, and so it's becoming more and more urgent for them, and there are less and less people supporting that legacy system, which is deteriorating. And there are not investments being made in it because there's less demand for it. So nationally, we're even seeing that a lot of these traditional landline providers are starting to negotiate with the FCC about when and how they can shut down those networks. So we take that with folks who are frustrated that they can't get internet. We're federally preempted from making the providers provide it. And we've got a growing sense of urgency in rural Vermont about providing an alternative means of telecommunication, looking at these copper landline networks. So this bill, as I said, is really intended to give our municipalities, our rural communities, hopefully working together and not individually, hopefully forming these communications union districts. It's meant to empower them with the ability to get support for a plan, like how will we do this? What is the technology that will work in our towns? how many people will we need to cover? Who wants to be covered? What is the topography? What's the right technology? Do we have the right partners available for us? Are there partners from out of the area that are willing to work with us? How will we pay for this? What are the financing models that make the most sense and that our town can support or our towns can support?
Another new wrinkle is the communications districts, which can now be formed when groups of towns organize themselves into units to build network capacity. That's what's happening up in the Northeast Kingdom, where, again reported in VT Digger, the 3 least well-served counties are forming districts to go where the private sector companies won't, because stringing wire to every last mile simply isn't profitable. Another area that many Vermonters are all too familiar with in terms of spotty service is cell phone coverage. Shaftesbury Select Board member Tim Scoggins has been driving the back roads of Shaftesbury, trying to get a handle on that, and here's what he told us a few weeks ago.
Yes, we picked up on the news that Corey Chase at the Public Service Commission, I believe it's Public Service, had been doing this mapping for as an effort to sanity check the provider maps that are used to decide whether or not an area is served or underserved for cell phone service. And he had very cleverly put together a bank of 6 cell phones, each one serviced by a different service provider, and had driven the major roads in the state to map cell coverage. And I spoke to him and found out he was very eager to see the fine detail filled in, to have more of the state driven than he could drive himself. And we were eager to do that here in Shaftesbury because mapping cell phone service is something we've always thought would be a good thing, but was never something that was within our capabilities. So it's average, I guess, for Vermont. It's like anywhere else. There's good spots and bad spots, but certainly everybody knows that there are places in town you just can't get a signal. I know where the dead spots are on the roads that I drive, and of course it varies from carrier to carrier. But yeah, it's not what people in the big city are used to, which is being able to use their cell phone anywhere. Certainly it's the case that in areas around here and certainly all over Vermont, there are certain areas where you can use a cell phone.
Can you hear me isn't leaving the state vocabulary anytime soon, but it may be that with all the attention being paid to it, things like broadband and cell phone service may be poised for at least a bit of an upgrade. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.